Hello everyone watching. My name is Emily Carter. At my sister's wedding 10 years ago, my parents gifted her a brand new Rolex and the keys to their entire estate. To me, they handed a crumpled, used gift bag with a cheap dollar store candle inside. A cruel joke for the whole wedding to laugh at. I smiled, wished them well, and walked out of their lives forever. They thought I'd end up with nothing. They had no idea I was already a millionaire. Where are you watching from today? And more importantly, have you ever had to choose between your family and your sanity? Let me know in the comments below, and please consider subscribing if you enjoy stories about justice. You're not going to want to miss how this one ends. The champagne flutes chimed like a chorus of mocking bells, each crystal clink a reminder that I was an alien in my own family's orbit. Sophie's wedding was exactly as she'd always dreamed, an explosion of white roses, gold leaf, and borrowed taste, all staged at the most exclusive country club in the county. My sister, the sun around which my parents' world revolved, was radiant. Her dress, a monstrosity of lace and tulle that cost more than my first car, glittered under the chandeliers. She glided through the reception hall, her laughter tinkling, every inch the golden child who had never known a day of hardship or a moment of doubt. I stood near the back, nursing a glass of club soda, a ghost at the feast. I had returned for this, breaking 10 years of self-imposed exile. A decade since I'd packed a single duffel bag at 18 and walked away from a house where love was a currency I could never earn. In those 10 years, I had clawed my way up from nothing. I worked 3 jobs, ate ramen noodles until the salt burned my tongue, and slept on a mattress on the floor of a tiny apartment that always smelled of damp. I put myself through night school, earning a degree in computer science. I built a small software company from that same apartment, fueled by caffeine and a desperate, burning need to prove that I was not the person they thought I was. Now, that company was worth millions, a secret I guarded more closely than any vault. To them, I was still the sullen, difficult child, the family's resident failure. My simple, dark blue dress and modest heels were, in their eyes, proof of it. My mother found me by the towering cake, her smile as thin and sharp as a razor blade. "Emily, dear, you're looking healthy." It was her favorite backhanded compliment, a way of saying I hadn't starved to death without her. Her eyes scanned my dress, a flicker of triumphant disdain in them. "I'm so glad you could make it. It means the world to Sophie that you're here to see her special day." She didn't mention it had been Sophie's fiancé, a bland but wealthy man named Richard, who had insisted I be invited. "She looks beautiful, Mom," I said, my voice even. I had spent years mastering this tone, a calm, smooth stone they couldn't get a foothold on. "Of course she does," she chirped, turning to watch Sophie laugh with a cluster of bridesmaids. She was born for this, a life of happiness, of being taken care of. Some girls are just lucky that way. The unspoken, unlike you, hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. Later, my father, a man whose presence filled a room with a booming, self-satisfied authority, called for everyone's attention. He stood on the small stage, his arm draped around Sophie, who beamed at the crowd as if she were accepting an Oscar. "My beautiful, brilliant daughter," he began, his voice thick with emotion that I knew was 90% performance. "Your mother and I have always known you were destined for great things. You have never, not for a single day, been a disappointment to us." His eyes flicked to me for a fraction of a second, a deliberate public cut. The crowd murmured in appreciative sympathy. "You have made us so proud, and to show you just how proud we are, and to help you and Richard start your new life together. We have a little something for you." A velvet box was produced. Inside, nestled on a satin pillow, was a lady's Rolex, its diamond-studded face winking in the light. A collective gasp went through the room. Sophie feigned surprise, her hand flying to her mouth, though I knew she'd picked it out herself months ago. "Oh, Daddy," she cried, "it's too much." "Nonsense," he boomed. "Nothing is too much for my princess. And that's not all." He pulled out a large, ornate envelope. "As you know, your mother and I are preparing for retirement. We want to travel, to enjoy our golden years. And we can do that knowing that the family home and all our assets will be in your capable hands." He handed her the envelope, which I knew contained the deed to the house and documents transferring their entire estate to her name. The room erupted in applause. Sophie was openly weeping now, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. It was a perfectly executed scene of familial devotion, but they weren't finished. "Of course," my father said, his voice dropping into a tone of condescending magnanimity. "We couldn't forget our other daughter, Emily." He called my name, and 100 pairs of eyes turned to me. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck, but I kept my expression placid. My mother approached me, a smug, pitying look on her face. She was holding a small, crumpled gift bag. It was one of those cheap, reusable grocery totes. Its festive pattern of snowmen and reindeer horribly out of place at an elegant June wedding. I recognized it instantly. It was the one she used to carry her coupons to the supermarket, faded and worn at the handles. "We didn't want you to feel left out, dear," she said, her voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. A few snickers rippled through the crowd. I took the bag. Inside, nestled in some crinkled tissue paper, was a single, cinnamon-scented candle from the dollar store. The price tag was still stuck to the bottom, $1.25. The laughter was louder now, a wave of ridicule washing over me. Sophie, standing on the stage, covered her mouth with her hand, but her eyes were dancing with cruel amusement. This was my gift, a public declaration of my worth to them, a joke. For a moment, the old Emily, the heartbroken teenage girl, wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the candle at their feet and tell them about the 90-hour weeks, the sacrifices, the triumph they would never know. She wanted to tell them that the watch on my own wrist, hidden beneath my sleeve, cost more than the Rolex they'd just given my sister, but I wasn't that girl anymore. I looked up, met my mother's gaze, and gave her a small, genuine smile. "Thank you," I said, my voice clear and steady. "This is very thoughtful." I clutched the cheap bag and the tacky candle like a prize. I walked over to the stage where Sophie and my father were still basking in their glory. "Congratulations, Sophie," I said, looking my sister directly in the eye. "I wish you all the happiness you deserve." I turned to my father. "And to you, Dad. I hope you and Mom enjoy your retirement." Then, without another word, I turned and walked out of the banquet hall. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The mocking laughter that followed me was the sound of my chains breaking. As the heavy oak door closed behind me, I took a deep breath of the cool night air. I threw the snowman bag and candle into the first trash can I passed. It wasn't an insult. It was a release. They had finally given me the only gift I'd ever truly wanted from them. A reason to never come back. Little did they know, when I left home 10 years ago after having had enough of their ridicule and ostracism, I had meticulously built an empire. Not only was I free, I was building my own world on the other side of the bars. My company, which had started as a small data security firm, was booming. I had a gift for seeing patterns that others missed, for anticipating the digital vulnerabilities of an increasingly online world. I hired a small but talented team who shared my work ethic. We worked in a mundane, unassuming office space. Our anonymity, a strategic advantage. We landed our first major corporate client in our third year. And growth was exponential from there. I lived modestly, plowing every penny of profit back into the company, acquiring smaller competitors, and investing in cutting-edge research. The quiet, melancholy girl they remembered was now a CEO, making decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. But no one in my old life knew. I existed only as a ghost. A cautionary tale they might have told at dinner parties about their daughter who couldn't stand love. My only window into their world was a reluctant one. Martha, a distant relative with whom I had always been close, would occasionally email me Christmas greetings. It was through these brief, gossipy messages that I pieced together the story of their breakup. For the first few months after that damn wedding, everything was fine. Sophie and Richard had gone on a 2-month honeymoon in Europe. They had renovated the family home, adding a pool and a swanky home theater. Sophie, who had never worked a day in her life, had launched a career as a lifestyle influencer. Her social media, which Martha had urged me to check out just once, was a carefully curated dream of designer handbags, lavish vacations, and champagne parties. My father retired with honors, handing over his successful construction business to Richard, who had no experience in the field. The first cracks appeared around year 4. Martha's emails mentioned that Richard had had bad luck with the business. Several large contracts had been canceled. Sophie's spending, however, had not slowed down. In fact, it seemed to accelerate, as if to prove to her online followers that their perfect life was still intact. I saw a photo of her on a yacht in Monaco, laughing and chatting with a glass of champagne, and I wondered if her Rolex was still on her wrist or if it had been pawned to pay the boat's rent. By year 6, the tone of Martha's emails had shifted from envy to concern. Richard's inexperience and my father's initial mismanagement had caused the construction company to collapse. The company went bankrupt, leaving behind a mountain of debt. My father, who had expected a comfortable retirement thanks to the company's continued profits, was forced to withdraw his personal savings. Now legally, Sophie's. The quarrels, Martha writes, were legendary. My father blamed Richard for being incompetent. Richard blamed my father for letting the business fail for him. Sophie blamed both of them for threatening her way of life. I felt a strange, detached pity watching from afar. Their world, built on a foundation of image and entitlement, was crumbling because it had no substance. They had celebrated unearned wealth, and now they were discovering the brutal reality of consequence. My world, in contrast, was built on 18-hour days, on code and contracts, on real, tangible value. I moved my company to a sleek new headquarters downtown. I bought my first home, a beautiful but understated house, tucked away in a quiet, wooded neighborhood, a sanctuary of peace I had earned 1,000 times over. It had a large garden, and I spent my weekends with my hands in the dirt, a simple, grounding pleasure they would never understand. The final telling update came just before the 10-year anniversary of the wedding. Sophie's influencer career had imploded. A disgruntled caterer had leaked a story to a local blog about how she'd paid for a lavish party with a check that bounced. The story went viral in our old hometown. The carefully constructed facade of wealth and happiness was shattered. The comments were brutal. People who had envied her for years now delighted in her downfall. Her followers vanished. The brands that had sponsored her dropped her overnight. Martha wrote that they had taken out a second mortgage on the house years ago to fund Sophie's lifestyle and were now struggling to make the payments. My parents, who had envisioned a retirement of world cruises, were now trapped in a house they no longer technically owned, living off dwindling savings with their 2 failed children. I read Martha's email and felt a profound stillness. It wasn't the satisfaction of victory. It wasn't joy. It was the quiet, somber confirmation of a law of physics I had come to understand. Things built without a foundation cannot stand. They had built their family on favoritism, their status on materialism, and their future on a fantasy. And now, the fantasy was over. I closed my laptop and looked out the window at my garden, at the sturdy, deep-rooted trees that had weathered 100 storms. They had what my family never did: a connection to the earth, a strength that came from within, not from the applause of an audience. And they were still standing. The illusion of the Carter family's perfect life didn't just shatter. It vaporized, leaving behind the acrid smoke of debt and desperation. The phone call that delivered the final chapter of their downfall didn't come from my mother or father. Of course, it came, as always, from Martha. But this time, her voice wasn't filled with the usual gossipy excitement. It was heavy with a weary sadness. "Emily, I don't know if I should be telling you this," she began, her voice a low murmur. "But I feel like you have a right to know. Things are, well, they're bad. Really bad." I was in my home office, reviewing quarterly projections. The numbers on my screen represented stability, growth, and security. As Martha spoke, they seemed to blur, a stark contrast to the chaos she was describing. "What's happened, Martha?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "The bank is foreclosing on the house," she said bluntly. "They're months behind on the payments for the second mortgage. Sophie and Richard are drowning in credit card debt. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Emily, he's been trying to start a new business, some get-rich-quick scheme, and it failed. They've burned through everything: your dad's retirement, the money from the first mortgage, all of it." I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silent room. The house, the beautiful colonial I had grown up in, the one that had been presented to Sophie on a silver platter, was about to be seized. The grand stage for all their family dramas was being dismantled by a collections agency. "And your parents?" Martha's voice faltered. "They're devastated. Your mom is a wreck. She won't leave her room. And your dad, he just sits in his armchair all day, staring at the wall. He looks like he's aged 20 years. The pride is just gone from him." For a fleeting moment, I pictured my father, the booming, barrel-chested patriarch, now shrunken and defeated. I pictured my mother, whose sharp, critical gaze had followed me my whole childhood, now hiding from the world. I expected to feel something, a spark of vindictive pleasure, a flicker of pity, anything. But what I felt was a profound, echoing emptiness. They were strangers in a story, and their tragedy felt as distant as a headline about a flood in another country. The emotional connection had been so completely severed that their pain couldn't find a purchase in me. "Richard left," Martha continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Packed his bags a week ago, said he couldn't take the pressure. He told Sophie he never loved her. He just loved the idea of her family's money, which, you know, is the biggest joke of all." So Sophie, the princess, was left in her crumbling castle with no prince and no fortune. The Rolex, Martha confirmed, had been sold years ago to pay for a ski trip to Aspen. The designer clothes were being sold on consignment websites for pennies on the dollar. The gilded cage had become a debtor's prison. "They're going to have an estate sale," Martha said. "The bank is forcing them to liquidate whatever they can before the auction. Can you imagine? All of your mother's antiques, your father's old awards, everything, just laid out on the lawn for the neighbors to pick over." I could imagine it perfectly. I could see the vultures circling, the same neighbors who had oohed and awed at the wedding, now haggling over the silver candlesticks and the porcelain dolls from my mother's collection. It was the ultimate humiliation, a public stripping away of the very identity they had spent their lives curating. I ended the call with Martha, promising to stay in touch. A promise I wasn't sure I would keep. I walked into my living room and stood before the large bay window that overlooked my garden. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. I thought about the house. I thought about my childhood room, the one with the window that overlooked the old oak tree in the backyard. I thought about the thousands of tiny cuts and slights that had happened within those walls. The constant, grinding pressure of never being good enough. The house wasn't a home to me. It had been a proving ground where I had consistently failed their tests. The fact that they were losing it didn't feel like justice. Justice felt too passionate, too engaged. This felt more like a mathematical equation reaching its inevitable solution. They had spent more than they had. They had valued image over substance. Their recklessness had a price, and the bill was finally due. The debt collector had come calling, and their accounts were empty. I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. My success had never been about them, but their failure underscored the wisdom of my path. I had chosen the hard road of building something real, something that could withstand a storm. They had chosen the easy path of coasting on appearances, and the first strong wind had blown their house of cards to the ground. I didn't know what they would do or where they would go. And for the first time, I realized I didn't care. Their fate was their own, a creation of their own hands. I had escaped the house long ago. Now, the house was finally escaping them. The catalyst for their pilgrimage was not a pang of conscience or a sudden surge of familial love. It was, like everything else in their lives, rooted in public image, specifically, the glossy pages of a regional business magazine. My company had recently won a major industry award, and my COO had convinced me to do a rare interview. I had agreed reluctantly, insisting they use a professional, slightly obscured headshot and keep personal details to a minimum. But the headline was unavoidable. From humble beginnings to a tech empire, the quiet triumph of Emily Carter. The article mentioned my hometown. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. A week later, my security gate buzzed. My assistant's voice came through the intercom, sounding confused. "Ms. Carter, there are some people here to see you. A man and 2 women. They say they're your family." My blood ran cold. I walked to the monitor, my heart hammering against my ribs. And there they were, standing on my doorstep like figures from a half-forgotten nightmare. My father looked frail, his once imposing frame stooped inside an ill-fitting suit. My mother stood beside him, clutching her purse like a shield, her face a mask of strained composure. And Sophie looked utterly defeated. The golden sheen was gone, replaced by a dull, desperate pallor. Her clothes, once designer, were now just dated. They looked small and out of place, dwarfed by the simple, modern lines of my home. For a long minute, I just stared at the screen. 10 years of silence, a world of distance I had built brick by brick, and they had crossed it in a single afternoon. A part of me wanted to tell my assistant to send them away, to pretend I wasn't there, but I knew it would only delay the inevitable. They were like wolves who had caught a scent. They wouldn't give up now. "Let them in, Maria," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "Show them to the living room, and please, Hold all my calls. I took a moment to compose myself, smoothing down my simple black dress. When I entered the living room, they were perched awkwardly on the edge of my minimalist sofa, looking around at the high ceilings and the art on the walls with a mixture of awe and resentment. My father was the first to speak, attempting to summon his old, booming authority. But his voice came out thin and reedy. "Emily, this is quite the place you have here." "Hello, father," I said, my tone polite but cool. I didn't invite them to get comfortable. I didn't offer them a drink. I stood before them, creating a clear physical and emotional distance. "Mother, Sophie." My mother burst into tears, a calculated, theatrical display. "Oh, Emily, to think you had all this and you never told us. We've been so worried about you all these years." The lie was so audacious it was almost impressive. Worried? They hadn't called once in a decade. "Why are you here?" I asked, cutting straight through the performance. Sophie, who had been staring at the floor, looked up at me. Her eyes, once bright with arrogance, were now hollowed out with desperation. "We need your help, Emily," she whispered. "We're in trouble. We're losing the house." "I'm aware of that," I said. My father's head snapped up. His pride stung. "How could you possibly? Has Martha been talking to you? That woman could never keep her mouth shut." He quickly regained his composure, shifting into the role of the patriarch negotiating a deal. "Listen, Emily, we're family, and family helps each other. We made some unfortunate financial decisions. Richard, that worthless boy, he ran us into the ground. But you've clearly done very well for yourself. We're so proud of you." Proud. The word was a poison dart. They weren't proud. They were stunned. And they were here to collect what they now saw as their share. "We saw the article," Sophie added, her voice gaining a bit of strength. "An empire," it said. "You have an empire. All we need is a little help to get back on our feet. Enough to pay off the bank, to fix the mess Richard made. It would be nothing to you. A drop in the bucket." There it was. The raw, unvarnished entitlement. There was no apology for the years of neglect, for the public humiliation at the wedding, for the lifetime of being made to feel worthless. They hadn't come on a pilgrimage of apology. This was a pilgrimage of proud beggars, who believed my success was a communal resource they were entitled to tap. I looked at their expectant faces, at the greed and desperation warring in their eyes. The girl I used to be would have caved. She would have been so desperate for their approval that she would have written a check just to hear them say they were proud of her, to finally feel like a part of the family. But that girl was long gone. In her place was a woman who understood that some debts can never be repaid, and some relationships are bankrupt beyond salvation. I let the silence stretch, watching them squirm. I saw the calculation in my mother's eyes, the pathetic hope in my father's, the simmering resentment in Sophie's that she, the princess, was being forced to beg from the family reject. "I see," I said finally, my voice as cold and hard as polished steel. "You're not here to see me. You're here to see my bank account." My mother gasped, feigning outrage. "How can you say that? We are your family." "Family?" I repeated the word, tasting it like ash in my mouth. "A family doesn't throw one child a feast and hand the other a bag of garbage as a joke." The callback landed like a physical blow. Sophie flinched. My father's face went pale. For the first time, they seemed to realize that I remembered everything. The memory of the wedding, invoked so plainly, hung in the pristine air of my living room, a ghost of humiliations past. For a moment, no one spoke. The entitled arrogance on their faces dissolved, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock. They had clearly assumed that time, and my apparent success, would have sanded down the sharp edges of the past. They had miscalculated. That was a long time ago, Emily. My father finally mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. It was a joke. A silly, misplaced joke. A joke has a punchline that everyone enjoys, I replied, my voice unwavering. That was a statement. It was a public declaration of my worth to you. And I received the message loud and clear. My mother found her voice, a high, whining tone of self-pity. We were just trying to motivate you. We were worried you weren't applying yourself. We did it for your own good. Look at you now. It must have worked. The revisionist history was breathtaking. They were trying to take credit for my success, to frame their cruelty as a clever parenting strategy. The rage that I had kept banked for a decade finally began to smolder, but I didn't raise my voice. I let the cold fire sharpen my words. You did nothing for my own good, I said, my gaze sweeping over each of them. You did what you always did. You elevated one daughter by crushing the other. You didn't motivate me. You freed me. When I walked out of that wedding, I wasn't running from poverty. I was running from you. My success didn't happen because of you. It happened in spite of you. I let that sink in before continuing. You are not here for a reconciliation. You are here for a bailout. So let's dispense with the lies and talk about this for what it is. A business transaction. Sophie bristled. A business transaction? We're your family. You forfeited the right to use that word with me 10 years ago, I said. Now, this is what is going to happen. I am not giving you a little help. I am not bankrolling a new lifestyle for you. I will not pay for your mistakes. However, I paused, watching the desperate hope flare in their eyes again. I will not have it on my conscience that you are homeless, so I am going to make you a one-time final offer. I will contact the bank and pay off the remaining balance on the second mortgage for the house. That will stop the foreclosure. The house will be yours, free and clear. Relief washed over their faces, but it was quickly followed by greed. And the credit card debt? Sophie blurted out. And we'll need some money to live on. No, I said, the word a steel door slamming shut. The credit card debt is yours. The consequences of your lifestyle are yours. I am giving you a roof over your head. That is more than you deserve. What you do from this day forward is your own problem. You will have to get jobs. You will have to learn to live within your means. I am giving you a foundation. Whether you build something on it or let it rot is up to you. Their faces fell. This wasn't the lottery ticket they had been hoping for. This was charity, but with harsh terms. And there is one more condition, I said, walking over to my desk and picking up a folder. I handed it to my father. This is a legal document, drawn up by my lawyers. It stipulates that in exchange for my paying off the house, you will never, under any circumstances, attempt to contact me again. Not by phone, not by email, not by showing up at my door. If you violate this agreement, I will pursue legal action to reclaim the full amount. This transaction buys your survival, but more importantly, it buys my peace. It is the price of my freedom from you. My father stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. My mother was openly weeping now, real tears of frustration and defeat. Sophie just looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. After all we did for you, she spat, her voice venomous. This is how you treat us? You'd make your own family sign a contract? The last gift you gave me was a $1 candle in a used bag, I said quietly. This gift is a 6-figure house. I think a signature is a fair price. Sign it, or walk away with nothing. The choice is yours. There was no choice, and we all knew it. My father, his hand trembling, took a pen from his pocket and signed. My mother followed, her signature a spidery, tear-stained scrawl. Sophie was the last. She threw the pen down on the table after she signed, the sound echoing in the silent room. I took the papers back. My lawyer will be in touch with the bank tomorrow morning, I said. Now, please leave my home. They left without another word. I watched them go from the window. 3 broken figures climbing into a beat-up old car. As they drove away, I didn't feel triumph or sadness. I felt only a vast, quiet, and profound emptiness. The final debt had been paid. The account was closed. I was, at long last, completely and utterly free. The weeks after that final confrontation were the quietest of my life. The silence they left behind wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of peace, of unburdened mornings, of a future that was entirely my own. There was no lingering anger, no desire for further revenge. I had looked into the faces of the people who had tried to break me and found that they held no more power. They were just ghosts. And I had finally closed the door to the house they haunted. True wealth, I've learned, isn't measured in stock portfolios or company valuations. It's measured in tranquility. It's the ability to sit in your own home and feel safe, not just from the world outside, but from the voices inside your own head, the ones they planted there that told you that you were worthless. My greatest achievement wasn't building a company, it was building a life from which I didn't need to escape. Justice isn't always a grand, fiery spectacle. Sometimes, it's the quiet closing of a ledger. It's paying a price not for them, but for yourself. The price of peace. I paid off their house, but it was my own freedom I purchased. They are now living in a monument to their failures, a house bought with the money of the daughter they discarded. They have a roof over their heads, but they live in the ruins of their own making, haunted by the knowledge of what they lost. Not the money, but the daughter who could have loved them, had they only let her. And that, I believe, is a sentence more punishing than any poverty. What does the word family truly mean to you? Is it defined by blood, or by the respect and love we earn and give? Have you ever had to walk away from something that was supposed to be forever, in order to save yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories matter.